Welcome, friends, and settle in as we step back in time to the shadowed, candlelit parlors of Victorian England, where Christmas was a season not just of cheer, but of eerie anticipation, strange customs, and an odd mixture of wonder and mild terror. Tonight, we are leaving behind the glittering, commercialized holiday lights of the modern world and immersing ourselves in a time when the boundaries between the living and the dead felt thinner. The air was thick with the scent of pine and roasting goose, and every family gathering carried an undercurrent of superstition and unspoken rules. Imagine, if you will, arriving in December 1851, standing outside a row of frost-covered townhouses, the snow crunching beneath your boots as you watch lamps flicker through frosted windows. A cold wind bites at your cheeks, but inside, warmth, candlelight, and the curious energy of anticipation greet you. This is a Christmas unlike any you have ever known. It is a season where ghost stories are as central to the holiday as mince pies, and where even a simple visit to the pantry can feel like stepping into a suspenseful tale. As you enter the parlor, you are greeted by a room that is both inviting and slightly unsettling. Heavy drapes block the winter chill but trap shadows in the corners, and the flickering glow of the fireplace casts familiar objects into shapes that your mind struggles to identify. You notice the family gathered together, bundled in layers of wool, each person attempting to find warmth in the collective body heat while also guarding against the unseen spirits that might linger in the room. The air is filled with the scent of pine needles shed from a tree that has been wrestled inside and precariously wedged into a stand. Candles perched along its branches, flickering and dripping wax in unpredictable patterns. The room hums with anticipation, for tonight is Christmas Eve, and the Victorians believed this was the perfect night for spirits to make their presence known. Ghosts, both benevolent and mischievous, were expected visitors, and families prepared themselves not only with prayers and polite conversation but also with careful attention to seating, lighting, and even the placement of food and drink. Every corner, every shadow, could conceal a story, a memory, or a wandering spirit from the past, and the household knows to be vigilant while still embracing the season's traditions. You notice a chair set slightly apart from the fire, perhaps a favorite for the evening's storyteller, and sense that when the lights dim, the tales will begin. Ghost stories are a central part of this evening, told not just to frighten but to remind listeners of their own mortality, the importance of kindness, and the subtle power of the unseen. Imagine sitting on the edge of an ancient settee, the fabric scratchy beneath your fingers, as a relative begins recounting a tale of the mistletoe bride, a young woman accidentally locked in a trunk during a holiday game, her spirit now wandering the house and rattling chains to the rhythm of an unfulfilled past. Your hands shake, partly from the cold, partly from the suspense, and you feel a strange thrill that mingles with discomfort, for these stories were meant to unsettle as much as they were to entertain. Outside, the wind howls and snowflakes swirl like dancers caught in the moonlight, while inside, the family clings together not only for warmth but for reassurance against the mysterious. The very idea of Christmas in this era is layered with paradox. It is a time of joy and fear, of abundance and risk, of intimate family moments interlaced with the presence of the uncanny. The room is arranged with care, each candle strategically placed, the fire crackling in a hearth that has seen generations pass through its warmth. Shadows dance along the wallpaper, and if you look closely, the peeling patterns almost seem to form faces or shapes that wink at you from beyond. The ticking of a grandfather clock adds rhythm to the evening, its sound magnified in the quiet moments between tales, and you cannot help but glance at the frosted window, half expecting to see a familiar ghost or the reflection of your own apprehensive expression. The air smells of pine, melted wax, and the faintly sweet aroma of a pudding that has been simmering for hours. Victorian families took Christmas preparation seriously, often spending weeks assembling elaborate plum puddings, decorating towering trees with real candles, and carefully planning seating arrangements to balance comfort, social hierarchy, and tradition. Every detail mattered, From the placement of plates to the order in which guests would receive their mince pies, for each choice could influence the outcome of the evening, from household harmony to spiritual protection. And then, as the fire flickers and shadows stretch across the walls, a hush falls over the room. Someone whispers about the barrier between the living and the dead, how it thins during the longest nights of the year, and how even a polite gesture, like offering a slice of plum pudding to a visiting spirit, might maintain peace and avert misfortune. The storyteller's voice rises, capturing every ear, describing spirits with a sense of solemnity and playfulness, teaching the young and reminding the old of the delicate balance between respect, curiosity, and fear. This is Christmas Eve in Victorian England, a mixture of awe, anxiety, and the anticipation of small delights. Children clutch dolls and blankets, adults sip hot punch while keeping an eye on the flames, and every sound, the groan of a floorboard, the crackle of the fire, the rustle of curtains, becomes a potential part of the tale, blurring the line between reality and legend. Outside, the snow continues to fall, silent and serene, a stark contrast to the lively and occasionally chaotic energy inside. The tree stands proud and slightly menacing, its candles casting elongated shadows, ornaments shimmering with an inner glow, and homemade decorations hanging slightly askew as if to remind you of the effort and care invested. There is beauty in this imperfection, a charm that connects the present moment with the history that surrounds it. The scent of pine needles underfoot, and the occasional waft of roasting meat contribute to an atmosphere that is simultaneously comforting and suspenseful. As the night deepens, anticipation builds for the arrival of unexpected visitors, carolers on the doorstep, friends and neighbors bringing gifts, and even mischievous spirits imagined or real. Each moment is heightened, every ritual loaded with significance, from the lighting of candles to the careful passing of dishes and the reading of small tokens hidden within plum puddings. Guests are expected to observe etiquette, acknowledge each story, and participate in shared customs, creating a network of social connection that is as much about community survival as it is about celebration. Through the laughter, mild chaos, and shared stories, participants experience the interplay of fear and delight, of tradition and innovation, of connection to the past and engagement with the present. By immersing oneself in this environment, one begins to understand why the Victorians were both so superstitious and so invested in the carefully structured, almost theatrical presentation of their holiday season. This is not merely a historical curiosity. It is a vivid window into how humans have sought comfort, order, and meaning in the face of uncertainty and the unknown. Each candle flicker, every distant footstep, every laugh and gasp is part of a tapestry that defines Victorian Christmas. And as you take it all in, you realize that the warmth of the fire, the richness of the food, and the thrill of the ghost stories all work together to create an experience that is equal parts unsettling and memorable. In the midst of it, the plum pudding simmers with hidden charms. The tree threatens to topple under the weight of candles and ornaments, and the family navigates etiquette, tradition, and superstition in equal measure, yet there is a rhythm to the chaos, a sense of anticipation that builds as night deepens. By embracing these oddities and uncertainties, one gains a fuller appreciation of the resourcefulness, creativity, and sheer resilience of Victorian households. And as the clock approaches midnight, you find yourself drawn further into the rituals of the evening, understanding that every carefully observed custom, every whispered tale, and every tentative glance at shadowy corners serves to reinforce a sense of belonging and connection across generations. The room, with its scents, shadows, and sounds, becomes a microcosm of the wider culture, revealing how deeply human beings invest in narrative, symbolism, and shared experience. As you take a final glance at the fire, the tree, and the gathered family, you feel a sense of wonder at the meticulous, sometimes terrifying, but always heartfelt ways in which the Victorians celebrated Christmas. Tonight, we have only just begun our exploration, and yet already we have glimpsed the combination of superstition, tradition, and delight that made their holidays so unique, memorable, and at times, slightly unnerving. So, sit back, allow yourself to imagine the flickering candlelight, the faintly fragrant pine, the subtle tremor of a story yet untold, and prepare to journey deeper into the curious, fascinating, and sometimes chilling world of Victorian Christmas. As we move deeper into the world of Victorian Christmas, it becomes impossible to ignore the era's intense fascination with children and their supposed connection to innocence, imagination, and even the supernatural. Victorian society held a remarkably idealized view of childhood, seeing children as pure, delicate, and morally untainted beings who were especially vulnerable during the long, dark days of winter. This perception influenced almost every aspect of Christmas celebrations, from the gifts they received to the rituals they were included in, and even the kinds of stories told in their presence. Imagine a household preparing for Christmas in 1860s London, the parents busy with elaborate decorations, the servants bustling to prepare sumptuous feasts, and the children caught somewhere between excitement and reverent anticipation. The children were both the center of attention and a source of anxiety, as Victorians believed that their innocence made them susceptible not only to moral corruption but also to encounters with spirits or other supernatural forces during the festive season. Parents would carefully orchestrate their environment, arranging furniture and lighting in ways that would protect the children from harm while also maximizing their exposure to moral lessons, enchanting tales, and holiday wonder. The concept of innocence extended far beyond mere naivety. It was entwined with a sense of responsibility, spiritual sensitivity, and the potential for both virtue and vulnerability. Gifts for children were more than objects of amusement, they were considered tools for moral and social education. Toys were chosen with great care, dolls to encourage nurturing behavior, miniature household items to teach domestic skills, puzzles and games to develop intellect, and books filled with fables that emphasized virtue, courage, and kindness. Even the act of unwrapping gifts was ritualized, conducted with a balance of delight and discipline to ensure that children learned gratitude, patience, and the social expectations of their class. At the same time, the children themselves were keenly aware of the magical potential of Christmas. Letters to Father Christmas were composed with a mixture of hope and solemnity, often including not only gift requests but also apologies for misbehavior and expressions of good intentions for the year ahead. The Victorian child's imagination was fueled by these rituals, and in many ways, society encouraged them to believe that their actions, thoughts, and even feelings could influence unseen forces. Alongside these carefully constructed domestic rituals, children were immersed in a world of stories designed to educate, frighten, and entertain all at once. Ghost stories, fables, and cautionary tales occupied a unique place in Victorian Christmas culture. Far from being considered inappropriate, these tales were believed to teach lessons about morality, courage, and empathy, often highlighting the contrast between innocence and corruption. Children listened closely, wide-eyed, as adults recounted eerie experiences, lessons learned too late, or gentle warnings from spirits, all while learning to navigate the boundaries between reality, fantasy, and moral responsibility. The duality of delight and fear, central to these stories, mirrored the broader Victorian view of childhood, a phase of life that was treasured, protected, and yet inherently fragile. Even the smallest domestic details were infused with these beliefs. Candles were carefully monitored, partly for safety, but also because light was associated with protection against malevolent forces. Windows were opened or closed with attention to seasonal winds and supernatural lore. Family members took turns watching over the children as they slept, combining concern for physical health with vigilance against the spiritual threats imagined by contemporary superstition. This heightened awareness created an atmosphere in which children became central actors in the drama of the holiday season, simultaneously cherished for their innocence and treated with extraordinary care because of their supposed vulnerability. Christmas performances, pageants, and carol singing were carefully tailored to involve children as both performers and audience. These activities served multiple purposes: to instill a sense of belonging and participation, to encourage moral reflection, and to strengthen family and community bonds. Children were taught not only the words of songs and the actions of dances but also the deeper meanings behind them, learning about generosity, empathy, and the joys and trials of virtuous living. Within the household, children often assumed symbolic roles. The youngest child might be placed in the position of special honor near the Christmas tree, while older children might take on responsibilities for younger siblings, mirroring the societal expectation that innocence must coexist with emerging responsibility. Even in seemingly casual interactions, the idea of childhood innocence pervaded every gesture, tone of voice, and expectation. Importantly, these Victorian ideals were not universal. The experiences of children varied widely based on social class, family wealth, and geographic location. While wealthy households could provide elaborate toys, detailed decorations, and carefully staged rituals, working-class families often had to improvise with limited materials, relying on simple pleasures, oral storytelling, and community gatherings to convey similar lessons about innocence, morality, and the season's magic. Nevertheless, the underlying belief in childhood as a sacred, protected, and morally potent stage of life remained remarkably consistent. Even when resources were scarce, children were treated as central to the holiday experience, and their reactions, whether fear, delight, or curiosity, were taken seriously. Stories about spirits, mysterious visitors, or benevolent figures were carefully moderated according to age and temperament, ensuring that children were both enchanted and guided in ways that reinforced societal norms. The Victorian approach to childhood during Christmas also reflected broader societal concerns about health, behavior, and education. Children were often shielded from harsh realities while being gradually introduced to social expectations and moral principles. By positioning them at the heart of holiday rituals, adults could both nurture and control, guiding children toward ideals of obedience, empathy, and refinement. The balance between protection and exposure was delicate, and missteps could result in admonition, social embarrassment, or moral critique, which only heightened the stakes of every carefully staged Christmas activity. Observing these customs from the present day, one cannot help but be struck by the meticulous attention given to children's experiences and the weight placed on their moral and emotional development. Each gift, candle, story, and seating arrangement was part of a larger system designed to cultivate both delight and discipline, merging the mystical and the practical in ways that feel almost theatrical to modern eyes. Yet these practices also speak to a deeply human impulse: to safeguard innocence, to celebrate imagination, and to create a sense of wonder and possibility even in the midst of the harshest winter. By understanding the Victorian perspective on childhood, we gain insight not only into holiday rituals but also into how societies define and protect the young, how moral education can be woven into everyday life, and how imagination and storytelling shape the way children experience the world. In short, Victorian Christmas traditions remind us that childhood was considered a sacred stage, one that required careful nurturing, vigilant protection, and ample opportunity for delight, reflection, and engagement with both moral and mystical dimensions of life. This emphasis on childhood innocence and moral education created a unique holiday culture, where the laughter of children intertwined seamlessly with lessons about virtue, cautionary tales, and imaginative exploration. It is in this delicate interplay between joy, fear, and moral instruction that we see the true complexity of Victorian Christmas, revealing a society that revered the child's mind and spirit, while also acknowledging the fragility and fleeting nature of youth. As the fire crackles, the candles flicker, and the children respond with awe and curiosity to the tales and rituals around them, we begin to understand how deeply these practices shaped their perceptions of the world. Every shared story, Every carefully placed ornament, and every whispered instruction about conduct contributed to a larger narrative about life, morality, and the human experience. Victorian Christmas was thus more than a seasonal celebration. It was a comprehensive exercise in imagination, education, and social cohesion, with children positioned at its moral and emotional center. As we continue to explore this fascinating period, we see how these beliefs about childhood not only defined holiday practices but also influenced broader societal attitudes toward family, morality, and the role of imagination in human life. By appreciating the centrality of children during Victorian Christmas, we gain a richer understanding of why the holiday felt so magical, so structured, and so imbued with both delight and dread. It is in these layered experiences that the true essence of Victorian Christmas emerges, a season where innocence was revered, imagination celebrated, and moral lessons conveyed with care, attention, and, occasionally, a touch of supernatural thrill. As we continue to explore the complexities of Victorian Christmas, it becomes impossible to ignore a darker, more unsettling aspect of this era: the widespread use of opium-based medicines and sedatives for children. While the holidays were portrayed as times of warmth, family, and wonder, the realities of Victorian childcare were often far from idyllic. Parents and caregivers, driven by both love and anxiety, frequently turned to medicinal substances to soothe crying infants, manage fevers, or calm children considered unruly or overly excitable. These substances were not marginal or secretive. They were widely prescribed and sold, often advertised as perfectly safe solutions for everyday parenting challenges. In households preparing for Christmas, where long evenings and intricate preparations could place stress on both children and adults, opiates and sedatives became a common tool. Mothers, struggling to balance household duties, festive cooking, and the emotional needs of multiple children, sometimes found relief in these medicinal remedies. The goal was often practical, ensuring that children could sleep through the night, remain calm during extended family gatherings, or simply survive the harsh winter without falling seriously ill. Victorian pharmacies stocked syrups and powders explicitly marketed for children, promising peaceful sleep and reduced fussiness. Dosages were frequently recommended by physicians, but the understanding of long-term effects was limited. Unlike today, where we have strict regulations and awareness of the risks of opioids and sedatives, Victorians operated with a mixture of trust, anecdotal evidence, and cultural norms that equated a quiet, manageable child with good parenting. Within the context of Christmas, this reliance on sedatives intersected with the desire to create a festive, orderly household. Elaborate dinners, candle-lit trees, and long storytelling sessions demanded that children remain relatively calm, and parents were willing to use the tools available to achieve this harmony. The use of these substances was not perceived as harmful in the moment. Instead, it was framed as part of responsible caregiving. Yet, from a modern perspective, it is startling to recognize how routine and normalized these practices were. Historical accounts reveal that some children were administered opiate-laced syrups or powders almost daily, sometimes for weeks at a time, without any awareness of the potential consequences. Symptoms of oversedation, reduced appetite, or developmental delays were often misunderstood or overlooked, and the moral imperative to ensure obedience and tranquility in children often outweighed medical caution. Stories from Victorian families describe both the apparent benefits and the hidden dangers of these practices. Parents recalled that the sedatives allowed them to manage household chaos during winter, enabling them to prepare feasts, attend social gatherings, and maintain appearances of order and refinement. Yet in some cases, children became increasingly lethargic, dependent on the substances, or susceptible to illness. These dual outcomes highlight the tension between the ideals of Victorian parenting and the realities of pharmacological intervention, offering a glimpse into a society grappling with both care and control. The use of opiates and sedatives also intersected with broader societal beliefs about children, innocence, and morality. Just as the Victorians believed that children were morally and spiritually vulnerable, they also perceived their physical and emotional states as delicate. Crying, restlessness, and perceived misbehavior were interpreted not merely as behavioral challenges but as indicators of physical or moral imbalance. Sedatives and opiates became a tool to restore harmony, both within the family and within the child's body, reflecting a philosophy in which medicine, morality, and domestic order were intertwined. Within the wider culture, the availability of these substances was promoted in print media, medical guides, and advertisements. Magazines and newspapers circulated guidance for mothers, offering instructions on dosages, methods of administration, and even recipes for homemade syrups. Physicians contributed to this discourse, often endorsing these remedies as standard practice for managing sleeplessness, teething pain, or irritability. While the intention was to ensure the well-being of children, the combination of limited scientific understanding, social pressure, and marketing created a scenario in which overuse and accidental harm were not uncommon. Christmas itself, as a season of heightened expectation and activity, often intensified these dynamics. Extended family visits, multiple children in close quarters, and the desire for social grace meant that parents sought any means to maintain calm. In many households, the use of sedatives was routine during this time, allowing children to nap or remain subdued while adults focused on celebrations. The juxtaposition of festive joy with pharmacological intervention highlights a paradox. The season designed to celebrate life and warmth was simultaneously shaped by anxieties about control, obedience, and health. Furthermore, these practices offer insight into Victorian notions of time, routine, and domestic labor. Parents were expected to maintain strict schedules, attend to household management, and uphold social appearances. In this context, the sedated child became a symbol of domestic efficiency, a manageable, predictable presence that enabled adults to fulfill both familial and social obligations. The reliance on these substances reflects a broader Victorian negotiation between affection and authority, indulgence and discipline, highlighting the complex ethical and emotional landscape of parenting during this era. From today's perspective, the widespread use of opiates and sedatives in children can feel shocking, yet it was part of a continuum of caregiving practices shaped by cultural norms, medical knowledge, and practical necessity. Families did not act out of neglect. Rather, they operated within a system that valued obedience, calm, and physical health, often interpreting pharmacological solutions as an extension of love and protection. By examining these practices in the context of Christmas, we gain a clearer understanding of how societal expectations, medical culture, and the rhythms of domestic life intersected in Victorian Britain. It also challenges modern assumptions about historical childhoods, reminding us that the comforts and joys of holiday traditions were sometimes built upon practices that would be considered highly risky or even dangerous today. Yet within this context, there is also a subtle recognition of the complexity of human care. Parents, constrained by limited options, sought to balance the well-being of children with the demands of domestic life, social propriety, and seasonal celebration. This tension between intention and consequence illuminates broader themes in the Victorian worldview, including the intersections of medicine, morality, and family. It reminds us that historical holidays were not merely periods of leisure and festivity but sites where societal values, domestic labor, and personal anxieties converged. By understanding the role of opiates and sedatives, we gain a richer, more nuanced picture of Victorian Christmas. A season at once magical and troubling, filled with both genuine affection and the stark realities of contemporary medical practice. Finally, this exploration invites reflection on how we, in the present day, approach childcare, medicine, and holiday rituals. Victorian practices, while extreme by modern standards, underscore timeless challenges, the desire to protect, soothe, and guide children through experiences that are both joyful and overwhelming. They remind us that every era balances celebration with responsibility, wonder with care, and innocence with the complex realities of the adult world. In the end, Victorian Christmas traditions, entwined with both festive enchantment and the pervasive presence of medicinal intervention, reveal a society deeply invested in the welfare of children, yet navigating this investment with tools and beliefs that could be as dangerous as they were comforting. The lessons we draw from this period are as much about empathy, context, and understanding as they are about history, offering insight into the enduring human struggle to nurture, protect, and celebrate the youngest members of our families during the most demanding and magical seasons of the year. As we delve deeper into the Victorian era, one cannot ignore the pervasive influence of advertising on the choices parents made for their children. In a society increasingly shaped by print culture, illustrated magazines, newspapers, and pamphlets became powerful tools in guiding public opinion, particularly regarding childcare practices. Companies producing syrups, powders, and tonics laced with opiates or sedatives understood that parents, especially mothers, were the primary audience for their messaging. Advertisements did not merely promote products, they crafted narratives about love, care, and moral responsibility, framing medicinal use as an essential aspect of conscientious parenting. Visual imagery was a critical component of this influence. Engravings and illustrations often depicted serene children peacefully sleeping, healthy and cheerful after taking a medicinal syrup. Mothers were shown in calm domestic settings, engaging lovingly with their children, implicitly suggesting that such harmony was the natural result of using these products. The connection between product use and moral, maternal competence was subtle but unmistakable. In a society where maternal authority was both expected and scrutinized, the idea that administering a medicinal syrup demonstrated devotion and skill was compelling. Parents were not simply buying medicine, they were buying reassurance, social approval, and a sense of mastery over the unpredictable world of childhood. Beyond images, written content in these advertisements played a crucial role in shaping perceptions. Copy often included testimonials from experienced mothers or references to physicians' endorsements, lending an air of authority and scientific legitimacy to products that today would be considered dangerous. Promises of peaceful nights, contented children, and protection against common ailments were repeated across publications, creating a standardized message that linked pharmacological intervention with proper parental care. The Victorian era was also characterized by a cultural fascination with progress and modernity, particularly in medicine. Innovations in chemistry and pharmaceutical production were celebrated, and new compounds were often marketed as breakthroughs that elevated the standard of domestic life. Parents, eager to provide the best for their children and influenced by these narratives of progress, frequently adopted these remedies as part of their routine childcare practices. This intersection of consumer culture, medical authority, and parental anxiety created a powerful environment in which the use of sedatives and opiates was normalized. The act of purchasing and administering these products became embedded in the rhythm of daily life, reinforced by advertisements that presented medication as both beneficial and morally responsible. Victorian advertising also reflected and amplified societal anxieties about childhood vulnerability. The portrayal of fragile, easily distressed children in magazines and pamphlets reinforced the idea that without careful intervention, children could succumb to illness, emotional disturbance, or moral failure. Sedatives and opiates were positioned as protective tools, enabling parents to prevent the chaos, suffering, and social embarrassment that could arise from a child's restlessness or illness. In the context of Christmas, this influence was particularly pronounced. The holiday season demanded heightened preparation, extended social interaction, and the management of multiple children in close quarters. Advertisements reinforced the idea that sedatives and soothing syrups were not indulgences or conveniences but necessities that ensured children could participate in celebrations without disrupting domestic order. Retail culture also played a role. Pharmacies and apothecaries were often located in central, accessible locations, allowing parents to observe, inquire, and purchase products with relative ease. Staff frequently provided instructions, anecdotes, and reassurances that mirrored the advertising messages found in print media, further solidifying the perception that these remedies were standard, safe, and socially endorsed. Historical records indicate that this environment created a feedback loop, as advertisements promoted sedatives and tonics as essential for proper child rearing. Parents used them more frequently, and widespread use reinforced the perceived legitimacy of the products. The cycle was self-sustaining, fueled by cultural norms that equated calm, compliant children with successful parenting. Moreover, Victorian advertising reflected deeper societal values, particularly the intersection of commerce, medicine, and morality. By portraying medicinal intervention as an extension of love and duty, advertisers tapped into the cultural expectation that parents were morally responsible for their children's well-being, behavior, and future potential. The messaging suggested that failure to provide these remedies was not merely imprudent but potentially neglectful, heightening parental anxiety and reinforcing consumption. From a modern perspective, the influence of Victorian advertising is a stark reminder of the power of media in shaping behavior, particularly when combined with limited scientific understanding and strong cultural norms. Parents were acting in good faith, seeking to do what was best for their children, yet the messages they received often encouraged the use of substances that carried significant risks. Understanding this dynamic allows us to appreciate the complexity of historical childcare, where love, commerce, and social expectation were intertwined in ways that could be both protective and harmful. Advertising also illuminates the broader economic and social structures of Victorian Britain. The expansion of print culture, the rise of consumer capitalism, and the professionalization of medicine all converged in these marketing campaigns, demonstrating how public perception could be shaped through repeated exposure, authoritative language, and appealing imagery. For historians, this provides insight into the mechanisms through which societal norms and medical practices were disseminated and reinforced, highlighting the interplay between culture, economy, and domestic life. Finally, the lessons of Victorian advertising remain relevant today. They remind us that parental choices are often influenced by complex networks of social expectation, marketing, and perceived expertise. Even with advances in medical knowledge and regulation, the desire to provide the best care for children continues to intersect with external influences, from social media to commercial branding. Reflecting on the Victorian era encourages us to critically examine how information, authority, and cultural pressure shape decisions in the domestic sphere, particularly when it comes to the care and protection of the youngest members of society. In the end, the pervasive influence of advertising during Victorian Christmas illustrates how deeply societal messaging can affect family life, childcare practices, and perceptions of responsibility. It shows that what may seem like a simple choice whether to administer a syrup or powder was embedded within a broader web of cultural, economic, and moral factors, shaping the rhythms of everyday life and leaving a legacy that challenges our understanding of historical childhood, parental care, and the intersection of medicine and society. As we continue exploring the historical context of sedative and opiate use in children, it becomes clear that family dynamics and social expectations played a pivotal role in shaping parental decisions. In Victorian society, the family was considered the cornerstone of moral and social order, and parents, especially mothers, were expected to ensure not only the physical well-being but also the proper behavior of their children. The pressures of fulfilling these responsibilities were immense, compounded by the scrutiny of neighbors, relatives, and the broader community. Parents were constantly aware that their children's conduct reflected directly on their own competence, character, and social standing. In this environment, the use of sedatives and other calming medicines was not merely a private choice, it was entwined with social judgment and cultural norms. A restless child, crying through the night or resisting mealtime, could be seen as a sign of parental neglect or incompetence. Conversely, a calm, compliant child was interpreted as evidence of attentive and capable caregiving. Sedatives became tools that parents could use to align their children's behavior with societal expectations, smoothing daily routines and demonstrating the perceived virtues of order, discipline, and control. Extended families often influenced decisions as well. Grandparents, aunts, and uncles frequently offered advice on childcare, drawing from their own experiences and prevailing cultural beliefs. In many cases, they endorsed the use of medicinal syrups, powders, or tonics, reinforcing the notion that these substances were effective and proper. Disagreement or hesitation could lead to tension within the household, further pressuring parents to conform to the accepted practices. Social gatherings and community observation also played a role. Children's behavior was highly visible in church, school, and neighborhood settings, and parents were keenly aware that disruptions or misbehavior could invite criticism. Administering sedatives was one way to manage appearances, ensuring that children could meet social expectations without causing embarrassment or challenging the authority of parents. These pressures were not limited to the Victorian middle class. Working-class families faced their own complex set of expectations. Economic necessity often required parents to balance childcare with labor obligations, leaving them searching for solutions to soothe children quickly. Sedatives offered a practical means to keep children manageable during long workdays or in crowded living conditions, while simultaneously signaling care and attentiveness to neighbors and community members. Gender roles further shaped the dynamics of sedative use. Mothers were primarily responsible for domestic management and child rearing, and any failure to maintain order or protect children's health could result in moral judgment. Fathers, while often less directly involved in daily caregiving, contributed to decision-making, particularly when it came to financial expenditure and social reputation. Sedatives, marketed as safe, modern, and effective, aligned with both maternal responsibility and paternal expectations for orderly households. The influence of social norms extended to medical professionals as well. Physicians often reinforced family expectations by recommending or condoning sedative use. Their authority lent credibility to practices that might otherwise have been questioned, allowing parents to justify their decisions to themselves and to others. Letters, diaries, and medical journals from the period reveal that doctors frequently instructed parents to administer calming syrups to manage sleeplessness, irritability, or minor ailments, framing such interventions as routine, responsible, and medically sound. Victorian culture also emphasized the moral imperative of maintaining harmony within the family. Peaceful domestic life was not merely a convenience, it was a reflection of virtue, discipline, and proper upbringing. Sedatives and tonics were thus presented as instruments of moral care, tools to nurture both the physical and emotional health of children while ensuring the family's reputation remained intact. The holiday season, particularly Christmas, heightened these pressures. Festive gatherings, extended family visits, and public celebrations increased the stakes for parents, who sought to present children as cheerful, well-behaved, and healthy. The use of sedatives was often rationalized as a temporary necessity to achieve social harmony, allowing families to fulfill cultural expectations without enduring conflict, tantrums, or exhaustion. At the same time, the reliance on sedatives was shaped by the limited understanding of child development prevalent at the time. Parents and social advisors often interpreted normal childhood behavior, crying, restlessness, or mood swings as problems requiring pharmacological intervention. Sedatives provided a solution that seemed aligned with both scientific authority and social convention, offering an expedient means to manage the uncertainties of childhood. Family letters and domestic manuals from the era illustrate how these choices were documented, discussed, and normalized. Accounts often mention the use of opiates or calming syrups as part of regular childcare routines, reflecting both parental concern and adherence to social expectations. Over time, these practices became entrenched, passed down through generations and reinforced by peer networks, community observation, and medical endorsement. The Victorian emphasis on public perception created a feedback loop. Parents used sedatives to meet social expectations, communities assumed such use was standard, and cultural norms further reinforced the practice. These dynamics were not only about child behavior, but also about adult identity, social standing, and moral responsibility. Understanding this context helps modern readers grasp why practices that appear shocking today were normalized in their own time. Parents were not negligent or indifferent, they were operating within a framework of social pressures, limited scientific knowledge, and sincere concern for their children's well-being. By examining the interplay of family dynamics, social expectation, and medical authority, we gain insight into how Victorian society shaped the experiences of childhood and parenting. The historical record underscores the complexity of these decisions, revealing a nuanced landscape where love, duty, fear, and cultural norms converged to influence parental behavior. Ultimately, the Victorian case demonstrates how childcare practices are inseparable from broader societal structures, illustrating that decisions about children are rarely purely private. They are influenced by expectations, norms, and authorities, and the use of sedatives serves as a powerful example of how families navigate these pressures. As we reflect on this history, it prompts us to consider how modern social, cultural, and medical influences continue to shape parental choices, reminding us that the tension between caregiving, social expectation, and perceived expertise is not merely a relic of the past but a continuing aspect of family life. As we move further into the historical examination of sedative use in children, it becomes impossible to overlook the influence of marketing and the pharmaceutical industry on parental decisions. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, drug manufacturers and apothecaries were not only producers of medicine but also key players in shaping societal perceptions of health and wellness. Through advertisements, pamphlets, and consultations, they created persuasive narratives that positioned sedatives and tonics as essential tools for responsible parenting. Victorian and early Edwardian marketing often emphasized the modernity, safety, and efficacy of these products. Packaging and labels carried images and wording designed to reassure parents that these substances were scientifically endorsed and morally acceptable. Popular magazines and newspapers regularly featured advertisements claiming that children could be made happier, healthier, and more obedient with the proper use of syrups and powders. These messages were carefully crafted to appeal to both emotional concerns and social pressures. Parents were made to feel that using sedatives was not merely a convenience but a reflection of their commitment to their child's well-being. Testimonials, often fictional or exaggerated, described families who had achieved peaceful nights and obedient children thanks to these products, creating a persuasive model that others felt compelled to emulate. Pharmacies and drugstores themselves functioned as both suppliers and advisors. Apothecaries provided guidance on dosages, timing, and selection, further reinforcing the idea that sedatives were a standard, medically approved part of childcare. Doctors and pharmacists often collaborated with manufacturers, recommending these products to parents under the guise of professional authority. The cumulative effect of marketing was to normalize sedative use across social classes. Whether in middle-class households concerned with social propriety or working-class families seeking practical solutions, advertisements created a shared belief in the necessity and safety of these interventions. Cultural narratives reinforced the notion that a calm, Compliant child was a measure of parental success, and pharmaceutical messaging provided the means to achieve it. Importantly, marketing strategies were not limited to print media. Public lectures, exhibitions, and medical journals frequently included endorsements for opiates, sedatives, and tonics. These communications portrayed sedatives as cutting-edge medicine, aligning parental choice with progress and scientific advancement. The framing suggested that failure to use such products could be interpreted as neglect or ignorance, further amplifying social pressures. The advertising rhetoric often intersected with moral and ethical language. Sedatives were marketed as gentle or pure, appealing to parental instincts to nurture without causing harm. By emphasizing natural ingredients or harmless formulations, manufacturers reassured parents who might have otherwise been hesitant to administer potent substances to their children. Beyond individual families, these marketing campaigns contributed to a broader cultural acceptance of pharmacological intervention in childhood. Communities came to regard sedatives as a routine aspect of child rearing, and questioning their use risked social disapproval. This normalization helped embed sedative use into everyday domestic life, creating patterns that persisted for decades. The influence of marketing also intersected with gender roles, particularly the expectation that mothers were the primary caregivers responsible for maintaining household order. Advertisements often targeted mothers directly, portraying them as the guardians of child health and behavior, whose competence could be demonstrated through the prudent use of sedatives. Fathers were frequently depicted in supporting roles, reinforcing maternal authority and subtly encouraging compliance with the advice of medical professionals and manufacturers. The consequences of marketing influence extended beyond mere behavior management. Parents' trust in pharmaceutical authority and advertising led to widespread acceptance of dosing practices that would later be understood as unsafe. The cumulative effect of repeated messaging, social reinforcement, and medical endorsement created an environment where sedative use became normalized, even habitual. Modern historians and pediatricians looking back at this era note the complexity of parental decision-making. While it is easy to judge the choices made by Victorian and Edwardian families as reckless, the historical reality reveals a nuanced interplay between cultural expectation, social pressure, and commercial influence. Marketing did not simply sell a product. It shaped the framework within which parents understood childhood, health, and responsible caregiving. It is also essential to recognize that pharmaceutical influence was not monolithic. While some manufacturers prioritized ethical promotion and safety, others exploited parental anxieties to increase sales, exaggerating benefits while downplaying risks. This duality contributed to inconsistent standards of care and varying degrees of harm across different families and communities. By analyzing marketing materials, advertisements, and commercial literature from the period, we gain insight into how sedatives were embedded into daily life and parenting culture. We also see the early origins of a pattern that continues today, the intersection of commercial interests, medical authority, and social expectation in shaping family behavior. The historical impact of marketing on sedative use illustrates the power of narrative in medicine. Parents were not merely passive consumers. They were participants in a cultural dialogue that framed pharmacological intervention as both a moral and practical imperative. Understanding this context allows us to appreciate the broader forces at play in historical child-rearing practices, revealing that the widespread use of sedatives was not simply a matter of ignorance or negligence but of social, cultural, and commercial influence converging in everyday domestic life. In conclusion, examining marketing and pharmaceutical influence deepens our understanding of why Victorian and early Edwardian families turned to sedatives for their children. It highlights the persuasive power of advertisements, social expectation, and medical authority in normalizing practices that today might seem alarming. It also reminds us that parental choices are never made in isolation. They are shaped by a complex network of cultural, social, and commercial pressures that continue to evolve. Recognizing this history provides perspective on the ongoing relationship between medicine, marketing, and parenting, and offers lessons on the importance of critical evaluation, informed decision-making, and awareness of external influences in child-rearing practices. As we continue exploring the history of sedative use in children, it becomes crucial to examine the role of early medical research and how it shaped or sometimes failed to shape parental practices. During the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the study of pharmacology and pediatric medicine was in a formative stage. Doctors and scientists were beginning to understand that children were not merely small adults. Their bodies processed substances differently, and reactions to medications could be unpredictable. However, this emerging knowledge often coexisted with traditional beliefs, commercial pressures, and social expectations, creating a complex environment in which medical advice, parental instincts, and marketing claims intersected. Early studies on sedatives focused primarily on observation rather than controlled experimentation. Physicians documented cases of children who exhibited unusual calmness or, conversely, adverse reactions to opiates, chloral hydrate, or other sedative compounds. Case reports, often published in medical journals, described patterns in behavior, sleep, and development, though methodologies were inconsistent and sample sizes were small. Despite these limitations, such reports began to reveal that dosage, age, and overall health could dramatically influence the effects of sedatives. Physicians noted that what was considered a safe dose for one child could prove dangerous for another, highlighting the need for careful measurement and individualized care. The dissemination of this research, however, was not always timely or widely accessible to parents. Many studies remained confined to professional journals, read primarily by doctors and pharmacists, leaving families to rely on hearsay, advertisements, or guidance from local apothecaries. In some cases, even doctors were swayed by prevailing social pressures or commercial incentives, recommending sedatives without full consideration of the emerging evidence. This gap between research and practice contributed to the normalization of sedative use. While medical literature increasingly emphasized caution, real-world application often lagged, leading to continued widespread administration of calming syrups and powders. Interestingly, early research also revealed both short-term and long-term effects of sedatives. Doctors observed immediate consequences such as drowsiness, slowed respiration, and decreased appetite. Over time, patterns of dependency, delayed development, and behavioral changes began to emerge, although understanding of these effects was still rudimentary. Physicians were aware that children could become tolerant to opiates or develop physical dependence. Yet the social context often mitigated the perceived severity. Parents, anxious to ensure a peaceful household, frequently prioritized immediate calm over potential long-term harm. Research also started to shed light on dosage errors and the dangers of cumulative administration. Physicians documented cases in which repeated use, even within recommended limits, could lead to unintended consequences. These findings gradually influenced medical guidelines, prompting recommendations for more conservative use and greater attention to child-specific factors such as age, weight, and underlying health conditions. Pediatric medicine evolved in parallel, with hospitals and clinics beginning to adopt stricter protocols. Observational wards were established to monitor children under sedation, providing physicians with more systematic data. These early efforts marked the foundation of modern pediatric pharmacology, highlighting the importance of evidence-based practice, careful monitoring, and the acknowledgement that children require different approaches than adults. Despite the growing body of research, dissemination remained a challenge. Many parents relied on advice from neighbors, family members, or local apothecaries rather than consulting medical journals or attending lectures. As a result, the translation of scientific findings into household practices was often delayed, and sedative use remained widespread even as awareness of risks increased. Early research also prompted ethical debates within the medical community. Physicians and scholars questioned the morality of routinely administering potent substances to children, particularly when the primary goal was convenience rather than medical necessity. Discussions emerged around consent, harm, and the responsibility of caregivers to balance immediate comfort with long-term well-being. These debates foreshadowed modern conversations about pediatric medication, informed consent, and the ethics of behavioral management through pharmacology. Cultural factors intertwined with research findings, further complicating parental decision-making. In societies where obedience and calmness were highly valued traits, parents often interpreted sedative use as a responsible practice, regardless of emerging warnings. Even as scientific literature highlighted potential risks, societal norms and pressures reinforced the acceptability of administering sedatives to maintain order in the household. The cumulative impact of early medical research was thus both illuminating and limited. While physicians gained insights into child physiology, dosage sensitivity, and potential side effects, the practical influence of these findings on everyday parental behavior was constrained by accessibility, societal expectation, and commercial influence. Nevertheless, the period laid essential groundwork for modern pediatric care, emphasizing observation, data collection, and the differentiation between child and adult responses to medication. Today, reviewing early research allows historians and medical professionals to understand the interplay between knowledge and practice in historical contexts. It demonstrates how emerging scientific understanding gradually shaped societal norms, sometimes with delays, sometimes with gaps, and always within the framework of cultural expectation. By analyzing these developments, we gain perspective on both the progress made in pediatric medicine and the cautionary lessons of the past. Recognizing the limitations and insights of early research underscores the ongoing need for careful study, dissemination of knowledge, and critical evaluation of both medical advice and societal pressures. In conclusion, the early medical research into sedative use in children reveals a complex landscape of discovery, limitation, and ethical consideration. Physicians observed and documented effects that informed future guidelines, yet practical application often lagged behind scientific understanding. Parental practices were shaped by a combination of emerging knowledge, cultural expectation, and commercial influence, resulting in widespread sedative use despite awareness of potential risks. Examining this history highlights the importance of evidence-based medicine, ethical reflection, and the responsible communication of research findings, providing lessons that continue to resonate in contemporary discussions of child health and pharmacology. As we delve deeper into the history of sedatives in childhood, it becomes clear that medical research and parental practices were only part of the story. Another major factor shaping the widespread use of sedatives was the commercial and marketing strategies employed by pharmaceutical companies. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the pharmaceutical industry was expanding rapidly. New drugs were being developed at an unprecedented pace, and companies sought ways to promote their products directly to both physicians and consumers. Sedative syrups, powders, and elixirs were marketed not only as remedies for illness but also as convenient solutions for behavioral challenges. Advertisements often depicted serene, compliant children and relieved, smiling parents, creating a powerful association between product use and desirable domestic harmony. These marketing messages reinforced societal expectations that children should be quiet, obedient, and easily managed. In print media, brochures, and even product packaging, pharmaceutical companies highlighted the safety and effectiveness of their sedatives, often downplaying potential risks. Claims of gentle action, natural ingredients, or long-standing use gave parents a sense of security, despite the lack of rigorous, standardized testing that modern medicine now requires. Marketing to physicians also played a crucial role. Pharmaceutical representatives provided free samples, promotional literature, and sometimes even financial incentives to doctors, subtly encouraging them to prescribe or recommend these products. Physicians, navigating an evolving landscape of emerging research, patient expectations, and limited regulatory oversight, were susceptible to these commercial pressures. The result was a feedback loop. Parents saw advertisements promising calm and content children. Doctors recommended the products, and pharmaceutical companies gained credibility and profit, further reinforcing the perceived legitimacy of sedative use. The language of marketing often framed sedatives as essential tools for modern parenting. Mothers, particularly in urban and middle-class households, were portrayed as managing busy lives, juggling domestic duties, and striving for social respectability. Sedatives became a convenient solution to maintain order and avoid public embarrassment, allowing parents to meet societal expectations of responsible child rearing without confronting the complex realities of childhood behavior. Cultural narratives around childhood behavior and parental responsibility amplified the impact of marketing. Societies that valued calmness, obedience, and predictable routines interpreted sedative use as a responsible, even progressive choice. Any cautionary advice from medical research was often overshadowed by persuasive advertising, which presented sedatives as both modern and trustworthy. Moreover, the commercial influence was not limited to marketing alone. Packaging and accessibility played a part as well. Bottles with precise measurement markings, colorful labels, and appealing flavors made it easier for parents to administer sedatives regularly. The visual and sensory cues reinforced the notion that these products were safe, controlled, and child-friendly, masking the underlying pharmacological potency. Over time, marketing also began to influence public perception beyond immediate consumer decisions. Editorial articles, parenting guides, and even fiction sometimes echoed advertising narratives, portraying sedative use as a standard, socially acceptable aspect of child care. This normalization further entrenched the practice, creating social pressure to conform. The cumulative effect of commercial influence was significant. Even as medical professionals increasingly recognized risks and potential harms, pharmaceutical promotion and societal expectation sustained high levels of sedative use. The gap between emerging knowledge and everyday practice persisted, illustrating how economic and cultural factors can outweigh scientific caution. Importantly, studying this period reveals lessons about the ethical responsibilities of corporations and the need for regulation. Unchecked marketing can shape health behaviors in profound ways, sometimes to the detriment of the most vulnerable populations, in this case, children. Historical examination also shows the long-term consequences of such influence. Children exposed to frequent sedatives sometimes experience developmental, behavioral, or physiological effects that were only understood decades later. The commercial drive for profit, combined with limited oversight, played a critical role in these outcomes. Reflecting on this history encourages a broader understanding of public health, highlighting how marketing, culture, and medical knowledge intersect. It also underscores the importance of transparency, ethical promotion, and critical evaluation of products, particularly when they involve children. In contemporary contexts, parallels remain relevant. Advertising, social pressure, and commercial influence continue to shape health decisions, emphasizing the ongoing importance of education, regulation, and evidence-based practice. In conclusion, the commercial and marketing forces behind sedative use in children were powerful determinants of behavior and perception. Pharmaceutical companies, through persuasive messaging, appealing packaging, and engagement with both physicians and parents, normalized and promoted the widespread administration of sedatives. Cultural expectations, societal pressures, and the desire for convenience reinforced these practices, often overshadowing emerging medical warnings. Examining this history provides insight into the intersection of commerce, culture, and medicine, offering lessons that remain critical in understanding the dynamics of health, ethics, and public trust. By analyzing the influence of marketing and commercial pressures, we gain a deeper appreciation of the multifaceted factors that shape pediatric sedative use and the enduring importance of careful, informed decision-making in child health. Another critical factor influencing the widespread use of sedatives in children is the societal attitude toward childhood behavior, shaped strongly by prevailing gender roles. In the historical context of the 19th and early 20th centuries, expectations for children were deeply intertwined with notions of masculinity and femininity, as well as broader social norms regarding discipline, obedience, and propriety. Boys and girls were often treated differently when it came to behavior management, reflecting the social ideals of the time. Boys, seen as naturally energetic, curious, and sometimes unruly, were often expected to learn self-control and discipline through structured guidance and, in some cases, pharmacological means such as sedatives. Girls, on the other hand, were frequently perceived as delicate, compliant, and emotionally sensitive, making them prime subjects for sedative administration when parents feared that emotional outbursts, crying, or resistance might be socially inappropriate or indicative of moral weakness. These gendered perceptions created a framework in which sedative use was normalized, almost ritualistically, as a tool to mold children into socially acceptable adults. Beyond gender, broader societal expectations played a powerful role. The ideal of the good child was constructed around quietness, obedience, and predictability. Parents, particularly mothers, bore the brunt of responsibility for ensuring that children met these standards. Deviations from expected behavior, crying, tantrums, or restless activity were often interpreted not simply as natural childhood expressions but as failures of upbringing that needed correction. In this context, sedatives became a socially sanctioned method to manage behavior and meet cultural expectations. The intersection of gender and class further complicated this dynamic. In middle and upper-class households where public appearances and reputation were highly valued, the use of sedatives could be framed as a form of responsible parenting, demonstrating care and control. In working-class contexts, practical concerns such as managing children while attending to labor-intensive tasks or long hours similarly drove the use of sedatives, though the social framing might differ. Cultural norms also reinforced the idea that emotional expression, especially in girls, should be moderated. Parents were encouraged, through advice literature, social commentary, and peer observation, to cultivate restraint, patience, and composure in children. Sedatives offered a seemingly straightforward way to achieve these ideals without enduring constant conflict or disruption. The societal pressure on mothers was particularly intense. Maternal identity was often measured by the child's behavior, and a well-behaved, calm child reflected positively on the mother's competence and moral standing. Fear of judgment or shame in the eyes of neighbors, relatives, or the broader community created additional incentives for sedative use. Meanwhile, fathers' roles, though generally less directly involved in day-to-day childcare, reinforced these expectations through authority and the reinforcement of gendered behavior norms. Fathers' approval or disapproval could shape how mothers approached discipline and the use of medication, further embedding sedatives into the routines of daily life. These attitudes also intersected with medical advice and advertising, creating a powerful feedback loop. Pharmaceutical marketing often mirrored societal ideals, depicting serene, obedient children and satisfied parents, implicitly reinforcing gendered expectations. Doctors' recommendations sometimes reflected these same biases, advising sedative use for restless boys or sensitive girls, thereby legitimizing the practice in both professional and social spheres. Moreover, the societal narrative extended beyond immediate child behavior to notions of future potential. Children who were quiet, disciplined, and emotionally controlled were often imagined to grow into successful, morally upright adults. Sedatives, therefore, were framed not merely as temporary tools for convenience but as instruments contributing to long-term development and societal order. The consequences of these attitudes were significant. Sedative use became normalized not solely through medical reasoning but through the broader cultural framework that equated calmness and compliance with virtue, and restless or emotional behavior with deficiency. Children learned to associate medication with acceptable behavior, potentially influencing their understanding of self-regulation and emotional expression. Studying this historical context reveals the profound influence of societal expectations and gender norms on medical practices. It highlights how deeply cultural values can shape healthcare decisions, sometimes in ways that overshadow scientific evidence or ethical considerations. Importantly, it also provides insight into the ways that social pressures can have lasting impacts on children's development, behavior, and well-being. Understanding the role of gender and societal attitudes in sedative use illuminates the broader lesson that child care, health, and ethics are inseparable from cultural context. Policies, education, and clinical guidance today continue to be shaped by these historical precedents, emphasizing the ongoing need for awareness, reflection, and evidence-based decision-making in pediatric care. In conclusion, societal attitudes and gender roles were central to the prevalence of sedative use in children. Expectations for behavior, shaped by cultural ideals of obedience, quietness, and moral propriety, intersected with gendered assumptions about boys and girls, influencing both parental practices and medical advice. These norms created conditions in which sedatives were not merely medical interventions but instruments of social conformity, reinforcing expectations and providing parents with a socially sanctioned method to manage children. Examining this history provides a deeper understanding of the complex interactions between culture, gender, and medicine, offering lessons that remain relevant for the ethical and effective care of children today. While historical accounts often focus on the practical or social reasons for sedative use in children, it is crucial to explore the psychological and long-term consequences that such practices may have had. Administering sedatives, especially over prolonged periods, had the potential to impact emotional development, behavioral patterns, and cognitive functioning in ways that were often invisible at the time. Children rely on natural experiences, play, exploration, emotional expression, and occasional frustration to develop resilience, problem-solving skills, and self-regulation. Sedatives, by artificially suppressing restlessness or emotional intensity, interrupted these essential processes. For example, a child who is naturally anxious, fearful, or energetic might have been medicated to appear calm and compliant, but the underlying emotions would not simply vanish. Instead, the child could develop learned helplessness, associating emotional expression with suppression or punishment. Over time, this could foster difficulties in emotional regulation, reduced confidence in problem-solving, and an impaired sense of agency. Furthermore, the use of sedatives may have disrupted social development. Interactions with peers are critical for learning cooperation, empathy, and conflict resolution. Sedated children might have been less engaged in these social exchanges, missing opportunities to develop crucial interpersonal skills. The subtle effects could manifest in adolescence and adulthood as difficulty navigating relationships or managing stress. Cognitive development might also have been affected. Sedatives can alter attention, memory, and concentration, especially in developing brains. While short-term sedation may have allowed for parental convenience, repeated or prolonged use could hinder learning, curiosity, and the natural drive to explore and understand the world. These consequences were compounded by the lack of awareness or guidance from contemporary medical professionals. At the time, the prevailing medical philosophy often prioritized immediate behavioral control over long-term psychological outcomes. Parents trusted that sedatives were safe and beneficial, unaware of potential developmental trade-offs. The societal context amplified this issue. Families faced pressures to maintain decorum, adhere to gendered behavior norms, and demonstrate responsible parenting. Sedatives were a convenient solution, even if they carried risks. In effect, cultural and social expectations created an environment in which children's emotional and cognitive needs were sometimes subordinated to the appearance of control and compliance. Importantly, not all effects were immediately visible. Some children may have appeared calm, well-behaved, and compliant, masking internal struggles such as anxiety, depression, or reduced resilience. These hidden impacts highlight the importance of understanding child development in a holistic way, recognizing that observable behavior does not always reflect underlying well-being. Modern research into childhood development provides insight into the mechanisms at play. Emotional expression, frustration, and active engagement with the environment are foundational for developing self-regulation, coping strategies, and adaptive behavior. By disrupting these processes with sedatives, historical practices may have inadvertently set the stage for long-term challenges in emotional and psychological health. Another important consideration is the potential for dependency or altered responses to medication later in life. Early exposure to sedatives, even if medically supervised, could influence how the body and brain respond to pharmaceuticals in adolescence or adulthood. While historical records often lack detailed follow-up studies, contemporary understanding of neurodevelopment and pharmacology suggests that early interventions with sedatives should be approached with caution. The psychological impact of sedative use also extended to parent-child relationships. Children who experienced frequent sedation might have internalized messages that emotional expression or restlessness was unacceptable, altering attachment dynamics and communication patterns. Parents, believing they were acting in their child's best interest, might inadvertently have fostered anxiety or a diminished sense of security. These dynamics illustrate how medical interventions are never isolated from social and familial contexts. Reflecting on these outcomes offers valuable lessons for modern childcare and pediatrics. Ethical approaches to behavior management emphasize supporting natural development, providing structure without suppressing expression, and considering long-term consequences. Evidence-based strategies prioritize understanding the child's needs, offering guidance, and creating environments that foster resilience, creativity, and emotional intelligence. In summary, while sedatives offered parents a seemingly effective tool to manage children's behavior in the past, the psychological and long-term consequences were profound. Emotional suppression, hindered social interaction, cognitive impacts, and altered parent-child dynamics illustrate that the effects of sedation extend far beyond immediate convenience. Studying this history emphasizes the importance of balancing behavioral guidance with developmental needs and highlights the enduring relevance of ethical, evidence-based childcare. By examining these lessons, we gain a deeper appreciation for the complex interplay between medical practices, societal expectations, and the lifelong well-being of children. The use of sedatives in children during past decades was not only a medical or parental matter. It was deeply intertwined with societal and cultural perceptions of childhood, discipline, and morality. Society, particularly in Western contexts, maintained strict ideas about what constituted good behavior and acceptable upbringing, often placing the burden of conformity on children while celebrating parental control. Families, especially mothers, were expected to manage children efficiently, balancing household duties, social obligations, and societal appearances. In this context, sedatives were not merely a convenience, they were a tool to meet cultural expectations. Public opinion on the practice was complex and sometimes contradictory. On the one hand, sedating children could be seen as responsible parenting, demonstrating that a parent could maintain order and prevent disturbances in social settings or domestic life. On the other hand, critics, often medical professionals, educators, or reform-minded journalists, questioned the ethics and safety of medicating children for behavior management. These debates reflect broader cultural tensions, the desire for control and conformity versus concern for child welfare and autonomy. Media coverage, literature, and public discourse of the time reveal both fascination and anxiety regarding sedative use. Newspapers occasionally reported miraculous cases of calm, well-behaved children after medication, praising the innovation and efficacy of modern medicine. Conversely, investigative reports and exposés highlighted accidents, overdoses, or troubling outcomes, warning parents and society about potential dangers. These mixed messages contributed to an atmosphere of uncertainty, where families were simultaneously encouraged to use sedatives and cautioned against them, creating a moral and practical dilemma. Cultural norms regarding gender and class further shaped reactions. Girls, often expected to be more docile and compliant, might have been medicated to conform to ideals of femininity, while boys could be sedated to temper high energy or rebelliousness in line with behavioral expectations. Socioeconomic factors also played a role. Wealthier families might have had easier access to medical consultation and medications, framing sedative use as a sign of responsible, modern parenting, while lower-income families may have relied on advice from peers, pharmacists, or hearsay, making the practice less regulated and more variable in effect. Religious and ethical considerations influenced opinions as well. Some groups viewed sedation as interfering with natural child development or divine order, arguing that children should be guided through discipline and moral teaching rather than chemically subdued. Others saw the practice as acceptable, even progressive, because it allowed children to rest, recover from illness, or avoid behavioral excesses that could lead to social or moral failure. This interplay between ethical belief, medical authority, and societal expectation illustrates that sedative use cannot be understood solely through the lens of individual choice. Communities, institutions, and cultural narratives all shaped how parents approached the practice and how society evaluated its consequences. Education and professional organizations gradually responded to these concerns. Pediatricians, pharmacists, and child welfare advocates began emphasizing caution, recommending alternatives to sedation and highlighting risks. Over time, guidelines evolved, reflecting increased awareness of developmental psychology, pharmacology, and the ethical responsibility of caregivers. These shifts were not immediate, however. They emerged through decades of observation, debate, and sometimes tragic incidents that underscored the need for regulation and informed guidance. Historical records indicate that public reactions were also influenced by visible outcomes. Children who suffered accidents, overdoses, or long-term developmental effects provided cautionary examples, sometimes prompting legislation or formal medical advisories. Conversely, cases in which children appeared calm, healthy, and compliant reinforced societal approval, illustrating the selective lens through which communities evaluated success and risk. Importantly, these reactions reveal a broader truth about human behavior and societal norms. Communities often respond to innovation with a mix of excitement and caution, especially when practices involve vulnerable populations like children. Studying these dynamics helps us understand how cultural values, professional authority, and moral beliefs interact to shape parenting trends, public perception, and policy development. The societal and cultural lens also highlights the unintended consequences of normalization. When sedation became an accepted practice, it created a feedback loop. More parents used it because others did. Media coverage reinforced perceived legitimacy, and professional guidelines initially lagged behind real-world practice. This normalization sometimes obscured individual, ethical reflection and delayed critical evaluation of potential harms. Understanding these historical patterns provides lessons for contemporary society. Today, parents, educators, and policymakers navigate similarly complex questions regarding technology, medicine, and child development. Modern debates about screen time, behavioral interventions, and pharmacological treatments echo the challenges faced decades ago. Balancing convenience and social expectation with ethical responsibility and child well-being. In summary, societal and cultural reactions to child sedation illustrate a web of expectations, pressures, and beliefs that shaped how parents acted, how communities judged those actions, and how medical and ethical guidance evolved. Examining this history reminds us that child-rearing practices are never isolated, they are deeply embedded in broader social norms, cultural values, and collective perceptions of morality and propriety. By studying these reactions, we gain insight not only into the historical context of sedative use but also into enduring questions about responsibility, ethics, and the societal shaping of childhood. As we reach the conclusion of this exploration into the historical use of sedatives in children, it is important to pause and reflect on the lessons that emerge from these practices. History does not merely serve as a record of past behaviors. It provides insight into how medical innovation, parental choice, societal norms, and ethical considerations intersect in complex ways. The story of child sedation illustrates this interplay clearly, highlighting both human ingenuity and the potential pitfalls of acting without sufficient understanding or oversight. One of the most striking lessons is the importance of critical thinking and informed decision-making. Parents and caregivers, acting in good faith and often under societal pressure, made choices based on the knowledge and resources available to them. In many cases, sedatives were seen as modern solutions, offering convenience, calm, and perceived safety. Yet these decisions also carried risks, some of which only became apparent after repeated use or tragic outcomes. The historical record reminds us that even well-intentioned actions can have unforeseen consequences when the long-term effects are not fully understood. Medical professionals, researchers, and policymakers also play a crucial role in shaping safe and responsible practices. The evolution of guidelines around child sedation, as discussed, reflects a growing recognition of ethical responsibility and scientific rigor. As society gained a better understanding of child development, pharmacology, and risk assessment, recommendations shifted, moving from permissive acceptance to caution and eventual regulation. This process illustrates the dynamic relationship between knowledge, practice, and oversight, emphasizing that progress often requires reflection, adaptation, and sometimes the humility to acknowledge past mistakes. The societal response to sedative use further underscores the importance of context in shaping human behavior. Cultural norms, gender expectations, class structures, and public perception all influenced how parents and communities interpreted the appropriateness of medicating children. By examining these factors, we gain a deeper appreciation for the complexity of historical practices and the multifaceted influences that guide human decision-making. Understanding these dynamics also provides perspective for contemporary challenges. Today, families, educators, and policymakers face similar dilemmas regarding interventions in children's lives, whether in the realm of medicine, technology, education, or behavioral management. The lessons of the past remind us to balance convenience and societal expectation with ethical responsibility, careful assessment, and respect for the well-being of young people. Another enduring insight is the value of empathy and compassion in historical analysis. Children who were medicated, often without full understanding or consent, experienced a range of outcomes, some beneficial, others harmful. Recognizing their experiences and the pressures faced by parents and medical professionals, allows us to approach this history not simply as a list of mistakes or innovations, but as a story of human complexity, where good intentions intersected with limited knowledge and societal pressure. Ethical reflection emerges as a central theme. The tension between authority and responsibility, between efficiency and welfare, echoes through decades of child-rearing practice. Modern audiences can learn from this tension, appreciating the necessity of questioning established norms, weighing potential harms, and advocating for the rights and well-being of vulnerable populations. In reflecting on this history, we also see the broader importance of transparency and education. Public awareness, professional training, and open discussion are essential for guiding responsible practices. When communities are informed and empowered, they are better equipped to make decisions that prioritize safety, ethics, and long-term outcomes. Moreover, historical patterns demonstrate how societal approval and normalization can amplify the adoption of certain practices. Sedative use became widespread in part because it was socially reinforced, appearing in medical journals, media reports, and parental advice. This feedback loop serves as a reminder to remain vigilant, critically evaluating trends and innovations, and resisting the tendency to adopt methods solely because they are widely accepted or convenient. Finally, the story of sedatives and children underscores the enduring value of historical perspective. By examining past practices, debates, and consequences, we gain not only knowledge but also wisdom. We learn to question assumptions, consider the voices of all stakeholders, and recognize the complex interplay between individual choice, societal expectation, and ethical responsibility. These lessons extend far beyond medicine, offering guidance for parenting, education, policymaking, and the ways in which we interact with new technologies and innovations. In conclusion, the history of sedative use in children is more than a tale of medical practice. It is a lens through which we can explore human behavior, societal norms, ethical responsibility, and the challenges of decision-making under uncertainty. It reminds us that progress requires both knowledge and reflection, that care must be taken when influencing the lives of vulnerable populations, and that the lessons of history remain relevant for contemporary society. By studying these stories, we honor the experiences of those who lived through them, learn from the successes and errors of the past, and cultivate a more thoughtful, compassionate approach to the challenges we face today. Understanding history empowers us to act with foresight and empathy, ensuring that decisions made for children, whether in medicine, education, or social policy, are guided by wisdom, ethical consideration, and the enduring principle that the well-being of young lives must remain a priority. As we wrap up today's journey through the history of sedative use in children, it is clear that this story is more than just a look back at medical practices. It is a reminder of how curiosity, care, and critical thinking shape the choices we make for the next generation. By understanding the successes, the mistakes, and the lessons learned, we can approach today's challenges with more awareness, compassion, and responsibility. Thank you so much for joining me on this exploration of the past. If you found this story thought-provoking, do not forget to like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives into history's most surprising and important stories. Stay curious, stay informed, and I will see you in the next video.